Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me. Remember me for centuries.
This is the Cameron Parker Show, brought to you by Spreaker, where we discuss everything from around the local professional sports scene in Colorado, such as the Denver Broncos.
Chris Harris comes out. I don't know if he was on the drive, but he said, I knew 15 seconds into that game that I should have been on T.Y. Hilton. If players are coming out and saying that, it falls again on the coaching staff. Not to mention insiders from around your local sports scene. Ryan Spilborgs, former outfielder for your Colorado Rockies.
It's not going to be the 25 guys that leave spring training that are going to be the only guys the entire season. I mean, you need depth. You need guys that are going to be in your minor leagues that you may not expect.
Ryan Edwards.
When you're talking about an offensive line, it's about the five best guys, right? And you're talking about the five best guys gelling. There hasn't been a lot of time for that.
It's showtime. Are you ready? Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Cameron Parker Show. Well, it is Wednesday. It is hump day for all you weekly, struggling people that feel like you want to get through the week. Well, it is Wednesday, and we are talking about the Denver Broncos. In particular, this is going to be just a single-pointed Denver Broncos Cameron Parker Show. It's going to be a Cameron Parker Show dedicated entirely to predicting the 53-man roster. If you guys can imagine that, we are actually one preseason game away from determining who will be on the Denver Broncos roster for the first time in quite some time, and it's really the first time in since I can certainly remember, but this is the first time in the NFL that they're trying something new, which is they will be condensing. They will end up condensing the entire moves from 90 to 53 in the span of a weekend. It's kind of cramming for a final necessarily, if that's something that you guys. I would not recommend it by any means, cramming for a final, but I think certainly with the Denver Broncos and with cutting it down from 90 to 53, especially with the types of moves that will need to be done, there will be some tough decisions. And there's going to be some tough positional groups, certainly, that is going to be up for discussion. We're going to delve into a lot of those special teams groups or those team positional groups, whether it is special teams, whether it is on the defensive side of the ball, whether it's on the offensive side of the ball. So we'll discuss that obviously as well, and want to get your guys' feedback. This is the Cameron Parker Show, brought to you by Spreaker. Please feel free to comment on our chat line. You guys can be a contributor over on Spreaker by creating an actual account. Or you can actually mention me on Twitter over at the Cameron Parker PO handle, also the CP_show handle. Like my official Facebook page, and that is the Cameron Parker Facebook page. It's a picture of me with some headphones. Be sure to like that. Go on Facebook as well in order to do that. We had a poll question right before we ran the show. And as we do every single day, and it was, which positional group is the deepest of the Denver Broncos roster? And right now, it appears that the safeties is running away with the voting. A close second is the running backs, followed by the defensive line and wide receivers. Now, obviously, if there were more choices, I would have thrown in a lot more, certainly, with that. With that being said, I ended up choosing my best four and maybe some of the deepest, certainly, for the Denver Broncos. All right, so like I said, it's a fun time. It's that time for fans and also for coaches, especially, to really kind of get down to the nitty and gritty aspect of what it means to be an NFL football coach, and that is making those tough decisions. I mentioned it earlier. It's all about making those tough decisions that could either set back your franchise or maybe find that diamond in the rough player that is an undrafted free agent, or that up-and-coming player that is really making a name for himself in the preseason and in training camp. There's been a few Bronco players sprinkled in there that certainly have done all the above with that. We'll be discussing about that as well. But one of the things that I want to do is I go through this 53-man prediction show. That's what I'm going to call it. It is the 53-man prediction show on the Cameron Parker Show. I will be going down through each and every positional group and discuss who will be left off the roster, who will the 53-man roster consist of. So I will be doing that throughout the Cameron Parker Show here tonight. So if it actually lasts a little bit more than an hour, I will let it push a little bit past an hour just to make sure we can get this 53-man roster in full. Are you guys ready with me? I for sure am. Let's get this thing started. When we come back, we will start from the very bottom and we'll work to the most important position, and that is the position that handles the ball most of the time, and that is the quarterbacks. But we will start first. We will start with the safeties. We will actually start with the safeties and start on the defensive side of the ball, work from the defensive side of the ball to the offensive side of the ball. We will start with safeties next, right here on the Cameron Parker Show.
God who saves, God who reigns, God forever pouring grace, oh Lord, we need so much more of you.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Cameron Parker Show. Let's dive right into it. We were diving into the safeties. In the safety group, it is obviously the guy that is of much talk right now, and that is T.J. Ward. T.J. Ward, Diamont Thomas, Darian Stewart, Orion Stewart. Obviously, we all know about Orion Stewart. Orion Stewart was the guy that infamously had the Friar Tuck haircut in the past, of the hazing haircut that the Denver Broncos ended up bringing back. Jamal Carter and Dante Barnett. I think out of that entire group, it's really easy to understand where the cuts are going to happen with this potential group. T.J. Ward's potentially going to stay, although he's in a very interesting position of being on the move, being on the trade block. Do the Denver Broncos trade him? Do they actually make a surprise decision and actually cut T.J. Ward here in the next couple days and over the weekend? It's a precarious situation to monitor, certainly, if you're a Denver Broncos fan. I think T.J. Ward is fine. He'll be here for a full season. The question still will remain, do the Denver Broncos pony up and actually extend T.J. Ward either during the season or after the season once the free agent period begins? You know, it's interesting. The Broncos are notorious for getting a deal done with their free agents to be either heading into free agency or right until that free agent, or right until free agency happens, or right until the season actually begins. So it's kind of an interesting spot, certainly, that the Denver Broncos found themselves in. Look at Darian Stewart for that matter. Last year Darian Stewart was a prime example of a guy that we all thought was not going to be on the Denver Broncos roster, and certainly he ended up forcing 3 turnovers. Really, he was a one-man wrecking crew against the New Orleans Saints, and it was after that game that he ended up signing the 4-year, $40 million contract. Quite the performance for the front office and the coaching staff to put their foot down and say, we're signing Darian Stewart to a long-term extension. Now, as far as the positional group, I think you see 5 safeties. I think you see 5 safeties in this group. And that'll be TJ Ward, Aqib Talib, TJ Ward, Will Parks, Justin Simmons, TJ Ward, Darian Stewart, Will Parks, Justin Simmons, and Jamal Carter. Those would be my safeties that actually make this team. Jamal Carter, we were talking about it before, as far as we were talking about it yesterday with the kind of interesting TJ Ward dilemma. We were talking about it from the standpoint that who does it actually open the door for? It opens the door, long story short, like I was talking to a bunch of you guys on Twitter. Long story short, it opens it up for a guy like a Justin Simmons. But as far as the under-the-radar players that certainly we might want to monitor, and as potential future stars of the Denver Broncos roster, Jamal Carter will end up being that guy, certainly, that you guys want to keep tabs on heading into 2019, maybe. Certainly for the Denver Broncos roster. He's versatile. He's at the University of Miami. It was a little bit interesting because at the University of Miami, they brought a physical presence, a physical type of play at the University of Miami that would translate to games, but it wasn't translating to the type of talent that they presented. And I think Jamal Carter presents kind of that new hybrid. TJ Ward has certainly become kind of that hybrid type player, but really Jamal Carter kind of fits that new wave hybrid type player role to where he can be a linebacker, he can be a safety, he can be a guy that's like a Deion Buchanan. I feel like we were talking about it yesterday, that he's kind of that versatile guy that could be a Deion Buchanan, a guy that is just so versatile that he can play in many different positions. And when talking about creating a spot and actually creating a spot for a player, versatility is, I'm guessing, one of the top areas that NFL coaches and coaching staff actually look at for a player. So it's important when looking at these guys that you look, well, what can they do in all phases of the game? And Jamal Carter can give the Denver Broncos maybe a little bit more versatility than a guy like a Will Parks. And with the kind of physical presence that Will Parks brings, because Will Parks is also versatile to where he can play the linebacker spot, or he can be the safety that can bring that physical presence to maybe replace a TJ Ward in certain packages. And the one area that the Denver Broncos were so creative of in the offseason last year was having the 3 safety look of Justin Simmons in the back and TJ Ward roaming in the middle with Darian Stewart up high. That's a incredible look for really an offense, because you have no idea what's going to happen. TJ Ward has okay coverage skills, but not as good as Justin Simmons. Darian Stewart's coverage skills is extremely underrated. And you got a guy now, maybe of a guy like a Will Parks and now a Jamal Carter that he can now throw into the mix. So the safety position, like another position on offense, might be the deepest positional group in the Denver Broncos roster. That's the safety position. Now we will head over to the cornerbacks. This is kind of where we hit into a little bit of a gray area, and an area, frankly, that could see a little bit of some tweaking. Aqib Talib, Bradley Roby, Marcus Rios, Dontrell Nelson actually was, I believe he was just released. Chris Lewis Harris, Brendan Langley, Chris Harris Jr., and Lorenzo Doss. Out of that group, which would be around 7 or 8 cornerbacks, you would ideally like to keep 5 or 6. And so for that cornerback spot, obviously Aqib Talib, Chris Harris, and Bradley Roby are going to be your mainstays. But then you kind of get towards the interesting point of who will be that number 4 cornerback, and that's where guys like Brendan Langley, Chris Lewis Harris, and Marcus Rios, and Lorenzo Doss come into play. I personally feel that Lorenzo Doss may have put himself off this roster. I think he does not fit the actual scheme of this Denver Broncos roster. He is a training camp MVP every single year, but for some reason it just can never translate to games. Whether it's been in preseason or regular season games, it just never seems to click for Lorenzo Doss. So I think Lorenzo Doss is an actual cut for the Denver Broncos this year. Another guy will be Marcus Rios. So in essence, the Denver Broncos will have Aqib Talib, Bradley Roby, Chris Harris, Brandon Langley, and Chris Lewis Harris manning the cornerback spot this season for the Denver Broncos. That would be 5 cornerbacks for the Denver Broncos cornerback squad. Coming up next, we will talk about the inside linebackers, or should I say the linebacking core. Of the linebacking core, and this includes pass rushers, who does that include as far as the linebackers is concerned? We'll discuss that coming up next, right here on the Cameron Parker Show.
I will bless your name, give it all to you. You're all I need. From the grip of pain, you have rescued me, sweep me off my feet. I will dance for you. With all my heart, I will bless your name, give it all to you. You're all I need. From the grip of pain, you have rescued me, sweep me off my feet. I will dance for you.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are talking about the 53-man predictions. We went through the cornerbacks, we went through the safeties as part of the defense. Now, we get to the linebackers. This is kind of the interesting point as far as with these linebackers because, well, those linebackers will include pass rushers. And in those pass rushers are guys like Shane Ray. I believe, obviously Von Miller, obviously. Shaquille Barrett as well. So Shaquille Barrett, Von Miller, Shane Ray, Kasim Edebali, all those guys, in essence, are going to be your mainstays. Shane Ray, obviously trying to heal from his injury. So when you look at this entire group, this is kind of interesting because there's a guy that is starting to kind of maybe make some small noise here with the Denver Broncos roster, and that would be a guy like a Deion Hollins. However, because of how deep this pass rushing core is, it might be imperative for them to actually keep an extra pass rusher just in case Shane Ray isn't fully ready for week 2, week 3, if need be. So that's why it might open up a guy like a Deion Hollins. But guys like Corey Nelson, obviously Corey Nelson, Brandon Marshall, all of those mainstays. Zaire Anderson is kind of in that interesting boat. Zaire Anderson is a thumper. He's in a very good physical run-stopping linebacker. But the problem is that it feels that he hasn't quite emerged yet as far as a guy that is wanting to play football at the level that he once played after suffering almost, you could say, a life-threatening hit last season with the team. So Zaire Anderson is an incredibly talented linebacker. And I think it would really hurt the franchise maybe if you cut a guy like a Zaire Anderson. I think that it's one of those tough decisions that you have to make. I personally feel that I think he makes the team. So guys like Vontarius Dora, Ken Ekenum, Jarrell Williams, Garcia, Quentin Goss, and Deion Hollins don't end up making the roster. Todd Davis is actually in a very precarious situation, and that's why guys like Corey Nelson and Zaire Anderson are still guys to monitor for their starting job coming into the season. And personally, on a personal note, the incident that Todd Davis pulled in preseason number 2, in preseason number 3, that just doesn't cut it with me. You can play with a lot of fire, you can play with a lot of intensity, but you never go after one of the no-fly zone members. You never do that. And not only that, but you never swing a helmet at a player. Not in a million years will you ever want to swing a helmet at a future Hall of Famer, and one that you actually might learn something from. So I felt like that was pretty classless by Todd Davis on a personal level. So I think that, again, you're going to get to that kind of interesting dilemma with guys like Kevin Snyder and Deion Hollins, Quentin Goss, Jarrell Williams, Garcia, Ken Ekenum, and Vontarius Dora. They're probably going to find themselves off the roster, or at least a practice squad opportunity. Vontarius Dora saw himself on the practice squad this last season. Now, the interesting one would be a guy like a DeMarcus Walker. Because they've played him in training camp and they played him in practices when Shane Ray's been out. Do they play a guy like a DeMarcus Walker in that outside linebacking pass rush type role? He's got an incredible first step. He's got that makings to be maybe a Malik Jackson type, a guy or that is just incredibly quick off the ball. But does he have the size to push the offensive lineman? That's really the ultimate question. So moving to the defensive line, That's where you have guys like Jared Crick making the roster. Adam Gotsis, surprisingly, is playing very well. And I think that Adam Gotsis has made this team. For Bill Collar to come out and say exactly what he said coming into the season, and stating that Adam Gotsis has to hit the gym or else. Pretty shocking statement, if you ask me, for a guy that was just drafted last year, and actually you could say was a little bit of a reach by the Denver Broncos as far as their picks is concerned. So Adam Gotsis makes this team. Domata Peko, Kyle Peko is maybe in the precarious situation. His cousin Kyle Peko might be in the interesting spot where he might not even be on the team. He was recently just taken off the physically unable to perform list, the PUP list, for preseason number 4. So interesting decision for the Broncos to decide to activate Kyle Peko off of the physically unable to perform list and have him perform in the preseason, in the final preseason game maybe. But it was a very interesting decision for the Broncos. Zach Kerr finds himself in a little bit of an interesting situation. The Broncos signed him as kind of a under-the-radar type defensive lineman, but he's not played well in the games in the preseason. He's a little slow in getting off the ball and trying to create contact. He's even having a hard time fighting off double teams. So Zach Kerr is in a tough spot. And that's why seeing guys like a Tyreek Jarrett and players like Shelby Harris really making a name for themselves and really proving to the coaching staff they belong on this roster is going to force them into a tough decision of whether they release a guy like a Zach Kerr or a Kyle Peko. Not a Domata Peko, but a Kyle Peko. It's going to put them in a very interesting situation. Ideally, I think you would like to have Zach Kerr on your roster. And I think he ends up making it. But, man, you're talking about guys like Shelby Harris and Tyreek Jarrett. Now, Tyreek Jarrett in particular is a little bit of a different animal. They list Zach Kerr at 6'2" and about 334 pounds. And they listed him positionally as a defensive end. That's roughly, by written down, that's roughly the same size as Tyreek Jarrett, which we all know is a lie. If you guys have all been over to training camp, Tyreek Jarrett was probably weighed in at 350. So Tyreek Jarrett is an animal. He's a guy that will soak up the double teams, but is young and spry enough to where he might be able to get off off the center or off the guard and maybe tackle a guy for a 1 yard loss, 2 yard loss every now and then. He can get off the ball, and that's what I think makes Tyreek Jarrett a little bit of an interesting character. Shelby Harris is the interesting one, which finds himself in a spot to where he could play multiple positions, to where maybe it wasn't just DeMarcus Walker as a guy that will be that Malik Jackson type role, but a guy like a Shelby Harris who's already playing at the weight of what Malik Jackson had in 2015. He's a guy that is so ferocious off the ball, has got a plethora of moves at his disposal, and he's a guy that can completely make reckless abandon when he has when a quarterback says hike. He is a man-child, and he's ready to, punch humans in the face. No pun intended. But Shelby Harris is going to make this football team, and I think Tyreek Jarrett will too. I think Tyreek Jarrett and Shelby Harris will make this team. And I do apologize about, for those of you that have been following on Twitter, I called Shelby Harris an undrafted free agent, and I was wrong. It's just he doesn't have a lot of tape on him, and he's been in the league for a few years. So the undrafted free agent will be Tyreek Jarrett. So the opportunity for the Broncos to continue that undrafted free agent turn will start and continue with guys like Jamal Carter and Tyreek Jarrett. So Jared Crick makes the defensive line. Gotsis makes the defensive line. Shelby Harris makes the defensive line. Jarrett makes the defensive line. Damata Pecco makes the defensive line. Still unsure about Kyle Pecco. Shakir Soto would be the most likely cut out of those group, although Shakir Soto I can see actually landing a contract with another football team because that's what the Denver Broncos do. They are so deep on the defensive side of the ball on numerous positions that you can easily see a guy like a Shakir Soto signing somewhere else. So that will actually cover the defensive side of the ball. So ultimately we have the entire defense set up. Jared Crick, Adam Gotsis, Shelby Harris, Tyreek Jarrett, Zach Kerr, Damata Pecco, obviously Derek Wolfe, Billy Wynn we lost for the season, which might open up a guy like a Kyle Pecco, and especially guys like a Shelby Harris and a Tyreek Jarrett to make the team. But guys like Shakir Soto and maybe a Kyle Pecco, I mentioned maybe that he does make it, but who knows? But yes, Derek Wolfe, Jared Crick, Adam Gotsis, Shelby Harris, Tyreek Jarrett, Zach Kerr, Damata Pecco, all of those are your sure-in, bona fide players that will make the 53-man roster, in my opinion, with Kyle Pecco on the bubble and Shakir Soto as the cut. When we come back, we will discuss the offensive side of the ball, talking about the tackles. Oh, the tackles that make you want to cringe. Talking about Donald Stevenson, Ty Sambrailo, Michael Schofield, who's a flex guard along with Sambrailo, and Donald Stevenson. It's just going to make you want to cringe just talking about those guys one more time again. Am I right? Well, we're going to be talking about that next on the Cameron Parker Show.
God who saves, God who reigns, God forever pouring grace, oh Lord, we need so much more of you.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It is the 53-man prediction show of the Denver Broncos. We will talk about the Colorado Rockies at some point. There's the struggling Colorado Rockies lost to the Detroit Tigers today, 6-2, off of a stellar performance from the future Hall of Famer Justin Verlander. And a Justin Verlander that has been subject to many trade rumors, and it was just reported that today that he will be unlikely be traded this season. All right, so we talked about the defense, and now we will transfer it over now to the offensive side of the ball. Tackles. This is going to make you guys cringe. I just know it, talking about Michael Schofield, Donald Stevenson, and Michael Schofield. Guys that really, who do they go with? Obviously, Donald Stevenson most famously restructured his contract yet again, just about kind of sealing it for him as far as a roster spot that he's going to make the team. So Donald Stevenson. If it was me, I would not have him on my roster. But this is, because of everything that's transpired, it doesn't appear that's going to happen. Now, this is interesting because now the one thing I'm not taking into account with these moves and with all the moves that's going to end up transpiring with the 53-man roster, I'm not taking into account trades potentially that could happen. Like a guy like a TJ Ward possibly. And now going into the offensive side of the ball, you go into the tackle spots. This is where you kind of are a little bit interesting. Do they decide to maneuver a guy in a trade like a Ty Sambrailo? A guy like a Ty Sambrailo maybe, who's now kind of felt a little bit on the outs now that Donald Stevenson had to restructure his contract, and you're starting to see the Denver Broncos kind of tilt their opinion towards Donald Stevenson, and frankly, considering Michael Schofield more than Ty Sambrailo, which is a little interesting. Now, so I think it's very, it certainly does make you cringe, thinking that Donald Stevenson is going to be on the roster again. So the likely potential cuts are the obvious ones, guys like Justin Murray and Elijah Williamson. But then you go to the new guy, Menelik Watson. Menelik Watson has all the talent in the world to be a really good offensive lineman and a really good offensive tackle. The problem with a guy like a Menelik Watson is he just hasn't shown it yet. He's not been healthy, and he's not shown it at a consistent basis for anyone to actually say, hey, you know what, that's actually going to be a really good guy and a really good offensive lineman for the Denver Broncos. There's been nothing to that effect for us to say, well, you know what, Menelik Watson, there's something there. And, well, I think there is something to that. To kind of do a little play on words, I think there is something to that as far as that. But I think that, you know, there was a few preseason games, a few in particular, where Menelik Watson was not performing at his best. And again, it goes back to his inconsistencies. But it also goes back to, we were talking about the quarterback position yesterday, and I was talking with some people from Twitter, and I always enjoy interacting with all of my Twitter followers and on a daily basis talking about the Denver Broncos. There was a topic I was talking about the quarterbacks, and every quarterback has a ceiling. Every player has a ceiling. Menelik Watson has a ceiling to be a tremendous right tackle or just a tackle. It's just a matter of them reaching there. Meaning the practice. Is he a gym rat? Is he going to the gym every single day? Is he actually putting in the homework? Is he watching tape? Is he understanding his tendencies? Is he understanding what might be wrong with his game? You know, is he moving his hips right? Is his hands placement right? All those things end up translating to a really good offensive lineman. Is his feet quick? Do they move? And can they recover to get the elite pass rushers that's in the AFC West? Does he do all of these things? That determines whether or not Menelik Watson will be successful, not just with the Denver Broncos, but in the National Football League in general. So And because, again, like I said earlier, we just don't know that yet because he's been injured. And once we've reached that point of where we start seeing Menelik Watson on a consistent basis, then we can start to say, you know what, Menelik Watson, he's a ball player. He's a football player. And I think he could be a right tackle for a long time. Or, excuse me, or you flip it to the other side of the coin. He's not a good left tackle, or he's not a good right tackle. Let's go ahead and release him. Simple as that. Now we get to the draft pick. And that will be a guy like Garrett Bowles. Garrett Bowles was drafted solely to be the left tackle. Remember when there was that one period where the left tackle was not solidified? Yeah, I remember that too. Made me not sleep at night knowing that the left tackle spot was not solidified. So now there's that opportunity for Garrett Bowles to really prove that he's a Pro Bowl caliber left tackle. Because I think he has all the makings in the world to be a Pro Bowl caliber left tackle. It's so important. It's so important for a player. It's so important for a player, no matter if you're an offensive lineman, running back, defensive lineman, anybody on a football roster. It's so important, so vital for a player to come into the National Football League and not change a single thing about that person's talent, or not change a single thing about what they want to do coming into the season. And Garrett Bowles is proving that. He came out and said that he's not going to change the physicality that he brings every single game. He's not going to change his type of play just because a player says that he needs to change his game. That's stupid. It's asinine. It's asinine for someone to actually tell someone to change their game when it is successful early in their career. Ultimately, I think the Denver Broncos have found their franchise left tackle. It's just, do they end up finding their franchise right tackle? So, with Garrett Bowles, you have now the likes of... You now have a guy that will be blocking the blind side of Trevor Siemian for the regular season. The question will remain, will Trevor Siemian keep his job the rest of the way? And we'll be talking about that once we get to the quarterbacks, because obviously the quarterbacks is the biggest topic of debate with the Denver Broncos fan base. Now we get to the guards. We get to the flexible guards to where you get guys like Alan Barber, Max Garcia, Billy Turner, Connor McGovern, Cameron Hunt, also Chris Muller. I'm going to give a guy... Now, he's starting to get some pull because of Twitter, obviously. But here's a guy that I've spoke with one of my friends and one of the people who's a little close to the situation. And he was saying that this is just to give you guys a little bit of a frame of mind about the type of talent that Connor McGovern presents. And this is a very bold statement, and I want you guys to listen to this of just as far as the talent that Connor McGovern presents. He said that if Connor McGovern goes out there and plays out of his mind at center during the time when Matt Paradis was recovering from the injury that held him out through OTAs and training camp until he came back in the third preseason game. If Connor McGovern came out and balled and played extremely well, the Denver Broncos would have considered putting Matt Paradis on the trading block. Arguably the best center in the National Football League was getting pushed by a guy that is versatile enough to play guard and center. Frankly, if that guy is so talented enough to play guard and to play center, he should be starting at guard. If Matt Paradis has already solidified the fact that he's going to end up being your starting caliber center for a decent while, I would at least try my best to, one, lock up Matt Paradis, and two, do everything in all possible to have the best offensive lineman out there. And Connor McGovern presents that. But because the guard position is inept and it's struggling, you have to keep guys like Billy Turner, Max Garcia, and Connor McGovern on the roster, and Dylan Day as well, just in case something goes down. But Dylan Day, I do foresee not being on the roster because of how well Connor McGovern has played in preseason. Now we move to the tight ends. Oh yes, the tight ends. The tight end group where we talk about maybe the most inconsistent of offensive skill positions on the Denver Broncos roster. The Denver Broncos currently have 7 tight ends, I believe, on their roster. They're going to keep 3. And we're going to keep this simple. Jake Butt will begin the season on the physically unable to perform list, leaving the roster with Virgil Green, AJ Derby, and Jeff Hireman. You guys ready for a bold statement? I don't know if you guys were following me on Twitter earlier today, because I did a Q&A with you guys. Thank you very much for doing that Q&A to all my Twitter fans and Twitter followers out there. Thank you very much for doing the Q&A. One of the followers posed the question as far as who is the likely person to be cut. Easy choice, and I was telling a person earlier, the easy choice is Jeff Hireman. But the person I think that is a likely candidate to be released is Virgil Green. We're talking about how TJ Ward is a vocal piece on the defensive side of the ball, a surefire leader, a guy that has a presence on the team as a whole. Well, Virgil Green has left about 0 impact on the tight end position in the time that he re-signed his contract of 3 years. And it turned out to be a contract that, frankly, the Denver Broncos did not need to sign him to that contract extension. So ultimately, Virgil Green might see himself as a potential surprise cut heading into the regular season. So, Virgil Green might see himself as a surprising cut in the regular season once Jake Butt is actually fully healthy and they decide to roll with the booty, rockin' never well. So I think that for Jake Butt, for him, their future tight end is not on the roster right now, at least won't be on the roster until midway through the season, and that's going to end up being Jake Butt. Once he hits the field and he's fully healthy, he's fully cleared, he's your starting tight end for at least 7 more years. However, the interesting conversation is, well, what about a guy like AJ Derby? AJ Derby, if you guys are, was kind of teased a little bit of it about 5 minutes ago. AJ Derby is a player that actually I see him catching about near, I want to say maybe close to 100 balls. So I want to say around 70 to 80, maybe. And I could see him having a monster year. Maybe not even that, maybe around 50. But I could see him having close to 700 to 800 yards receiving. I said Jamal Charles would have 700 to 800 yards rushing. But I think that A.J. Derby will have 700 to 800 yards receiving. Just because of the receiving target that he is for the Denver Broncos offense, and especially since he is a receiving tight end. Jeff Hireman is probably the most athletic tight end on the roster, not named Jake Butt. So we still don't know what we're going to get from Jake Butt. He's on the Julius Thomas plan right now. And the Julius Thomas plan ended up panning out for the last 2 years of his contract. So will we get that from a guy like a Jeff Hireman? We don't know. But Jeff Hireman, I think, is a very special tight end, but we don't know if we're going to get that or not. Now we get to the wide receivers. The other skill positions that's extremely inconsistent the past few years. And this is a unit that will probably hold 6 to 7 players. Here we go. Their wide receiver group will go as follows. Emmanuel Sanders, Demaryius Thomas, Isaiah McKenzie, Khalif Raymond, Carlos Henderson, and Jordan Taylor. I think Jordan Taylor made this football team. I was questioning about where he was at about a week and a half or so ago. I don't think Benny Fowler and Cody Latimer make this team. And it isn't just the fact that I don't know if they make the team. I wonder if one of them is going to be traded and or cut. The Broncos are going to need a special teams guru on kickoffs. Isaiah McKenzie is too small to get kickoffs. I don't know if they really want to go with the Trendon Holiday experiment, other than the fact that he was explosive for a period, but kickoffs are where small players go to die. Just because the special teams units are usually licking their chops to lay the lumber every now and then for a small guy like that. So do they really want to force Isaiah McKenzie into an unhealthy situation? I'm not sure. And that's why a guy like a Khalif Raymond enters the picture. That's why a guy like a Khalif Raymond enters the picture and enters the fold as my kickoff returner. So there is your wide receiving core. We head into the running backs. This is my deepest of the roster positions. We teased it. This is the deepest roster position on the Denver Broncos roster. I think it's the running backs. It's the deepest it's ever been in the last handful of years. And the Denver Broncos have Jamal Charles, C.J. Anderson, Devontae Booker will be back around week 3, D'Angelo Henderson, Stephen Ridley, that entire unit has stepped up in a monster way. However, one has to go. And that's Stephen Ridley. I absolutely love the story that Stephen Ridley put forth in this training camp. For a guy that was out of a job, found himself on the Denver Broncos potential name to watch list, only to be beaten out by maybe a potential Hall of Famer, Jamal Charles. But he played his butt off. He ran hard, he made the right amount of cuts, and he made the cuts necessary he made the cuts necessary to force a second opinion on the coaching staff. So he ran with a purpose. And not only that, he ran himself onto another roster. Stephen Ridley performed exceptionally well. But at the end of the day, it's C.J. Anderson, Devontae Booker, Jamal Charles, and D'Angelo Henderson as your running backs heading into the regular season. With your fullback, Andy Janovich. Andy Janovich will be your fullback on this roster. Love Jano. If I had 22 Janos, we would be all right. That was Brock Olivo, and anybody that I could have told you 20 million times the minute that I heard Brock Olivo say that about Janovich, I knew he was making the team. And long story short, the Broncos will keep, at this point, they will keep three quarterbacks. It just will not be Kyle Sloter. Here's my issue with the quarterback situation right now. The Denver Broncos did themselves a major disservice of putting Kyle Sloter in the awkward position of not having him compete at all for the starting job or even for the backup role in Denver. They did themselves a major disservice by not doing that. Because now they have a guy who is going to perform with a major chip on his shoulder, a guy that is going to perform and prove everybody wrong because they have faith in the first-round draft pick. Look, I still believe that Paxton Lynch has the makings to be a really good quarterback. But the problem is that this entire preseason, you saw Kyle Sloter outperform Paxton Lynch. That's not really good for the development of your first-round quarterback. But ideally, Trevor Siemian will be your starter, and the Denver Broncos will hold three quarterbacks on their roster. One will be a new guy. It'll be a backup as Paxton Lynch is nursing his throwing shoulder. So ideally, you want your quarterback to have a quality backup in case Trevor Siemian cannot go down. And right now, there's just not enough faith to roll with a guy like a Paxton Lynch and roll with a guy that has a bum shoulder, more importantly. So it's a move that the Broncos have to make, and whether they make a snap decision, they make a snap decision. But looking at the candidates and the people that are out there right now as free agents, it's not appealing by any means. Well, thank you guys very much for tuning into this 53-man roster prediction show. I will be talking about the Denver Broncos recapping their preseason game number 4. While going into next week, I will actually give you guys a NFL preview show where we don't just talk about the Denver Broncos, but we talk about all the other 31 teams in the National Football League, and also try and see if I can do some award predictions, give who might win MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Coach of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year, all those awards going on in the regular season as well. So please be on the lookout for that in the coming shows. Thank you guys for tuning in to this edition of the Cameron Parker Show. Make sure you follow the Twitter handle at Cameron Parker PO and also the show handle at CP_show. And make sure you like us on Facebook, or my Facebook page on Facebook at Cameron Parker. It's a picture of me with headphones in my shot. This has been the Cameron Parker Show. And I will ask you guys to tune in next week on Tuesday, coming at 7 o'clock. Thank you, and have a blessed evening.